Dust curled in the wind like smoke from a dying fire. High noon burned the Montana sky raw, bleaching the scrubland to bone and shadow. A lone rider crested the ridge above the basin, hat low, shoulders squared, a silhouette carved from sun and silence. The horse beneath him moved slow, each step deliberate, as if it, too, knew the land didn't forgive carelessness. John Maddox tugged on the reins and paused, letting his gaze sweep over the valley. From here, he could see everything: his barn, the narrow creek slicing through the dirt like a silver ribbon, the crooked fence he'd mended 3 times this month alone. But something gnawed at the edge of his calm. A gate hung open, swinging lazily in the wind. The smoke from the chimney was gone. He clicked his tongue, and the mare descended the slope. John wasn't a man who spooked easy. The war had taken that from him, along with the tip of one finger and a brother buried in Tennessee clay. The years that followed had been lean and hard, but he'd built a life on this land. He'd buried a wife, raised a daughter, planted oats by hand until his back screamed. He knew every creak of the barn, every stubborn post in the fence. And something wasn't right. When he reached the gate, he dismounted in silence. Dust rose around his boots. He slipped his gloves off, letting the heat touch his scarred hands. No chickens clucked from the coop. The barn door stood half open. He squinted toward the house. Emmy's coat still hung on the nail by the porch. The first sign of trouble was the prints, hoof marks, fresh, heavy. 3 sets, maybe 4. Too close to the barn, too far from the trail. He stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Man's sweat, leather, gun oil, and blood. Not much, but enough to lift every hair on his neck. He turned to shout for Emmy, and that's when the blow landed. Something cracked against his shoulder, sending him stumbling sideways into the grain sacks. Before he could draw breath, a boot slammed into his ribs. He gasped, wheezed, reached for the knife on his belt, but a second attacker pinned him down, fist smashing into his face. 3 of them, maybe more. No words, just grunts, fists, the dull thud of violence carried out with purpose. John fought like a cornered wolf, but his years worked against him. One grabbed his arms, twisted them behind his back. Another slammed his head into the beam until everything went black at the edges. A flash of light burst in his skull. Then another hit to the gut, hard and sharp enough to buckle his legs. They dragged him out into the sun and flung him down in the dirt like a sack of potatoes. He blinked up at the light, his vision swimming. Above him stood 3 men, lean, wild-eyed. The one in front had a hat like a cavalryman and a scar slicing across his cheek like a whip mark. Another wore a vest that looked like it used to be Union blue. The third was young, maybe 20. Grinning like this was all just fun. "You John Maddox?" the leader asked, voice thick with dust and whiskey. John didn't answer, didn't have the breath. "That's your name on the papers, ain't it?" He knelt, tilting his head. "Man says he owns the water rights. He best be ready to bleed for him." John spat blood. The young one kicked him hard in the ribs. They tied his hands with barbed wire, tight, cruel, cutting into flesh. He groaned, but they just laughed. One of them rummaged through the barn and came out with his Winchester. Another took his hat and tossed it on his own head. "Tell your ghosts," the leader whispered. "This land don't belong to you no more." They dragged him to the hitching post and lashed him there, wrists bloody, knees scraping against the dirt. His head lolled forward. The last thing he saw as they mounted up was his mare being led away, rein slack in the bandit's hand. They rode off in no rush, back down the trail, their laughter floating behind them like smoke. Blood pooled beneath his knees. His chest rose and fell in shallow, painful heaves. The sun climbed higher, merciless and white. Somewhere behind the barn, a twig snapped. Emmy had seen it all. She crouched low in the brush, her small fingers clenched around a branch she didn't remember picking up. Her knees were wet from the mud near the creek, where she'd been washing carrots. When she saw the men strike her father, her throat closed. She wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but hide. But she stayed still, the way her mother once taught her when they found a mountain lion near the cabin. Her father didn't cry out. He never had. Not when he broke his arm that winter. Not when Mama died coughing blood into his lap. Not when he buried her alone under the ash tree and came inside looking like he'd lost more than just a wife. But now he was bleeding. His mouth hung open. His fingers twitched where the wire cut into them. She waited until the hoofbeats faded. Then she ran. She wasn't tall, or strong, or old enough to lift her father's body. But she tried. Her small hands worked the wire loose, flinching each time it tugged at his skin. He groaned once, low and deep. "Papa," she whispered, kneeling in the dust. "Papa, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open. Blood ran down the side of his jaw, seeping into the neck of his shirt. His lips moved, but the words didn't come right away. Then, rasping, "They want the spring." She looked to the hills. The spring fed their valley. Without it, the crops wouldn't last a week. The cattle would die. She understood what he meant. The land had always been more than land. It was memory, her mother's voice in the breeze, her own footprints next to her father's in the field. She dragged him into the shade of the old pine, the one her mother planted before Emmy could walk. She ran to the house, brought water, rags, the tin box of medicines that had sat unopened since the fever took Mama. She cleaned his wounds with trembling hands. She whispered prayers she barely remembered. He drifted in and out, mumbling names she didn't recognize. Once he said her mother's name. The afternoon burned on. A cloud of flies gathered over the bloodstains near the barn. Emmy stared at the empty space where the horses had been, at the post where her father had sagged like a hanged man. The valley was quiet again, too quiet. She stood, wiped her hands on her skirt, and walked to the house. Beneath the floorboards, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay the rifle. Her father had kept it there since the day they moved west. She'd seen him clean it, seen him fire it at coyotes circling the chickens. But she had never touched it. Her fingers found it in the dark. She held it, cradled it awkwardly. Heavy, real. In the distance, the wind shifted. The bandits were gone, but they'd be back, to claim what wasn't theirs, to finish what they'd started. She stepped out onto the porch. The sun was setting over the ridge, and Emmy Maddox was holding the rifle. The wind shifted just enough to rattle the dead stalks of corn, but Emmy didn't move. She crouched low in the brittle grass, watching her father's body sway slightly against the post, limp like a rag in a storm. Her breath came in shallow bursts, heart thudding in her ears louder than the hoofbeats that faded minutes ago. The dust from the horses still hung in the air, settling on everything like ash after a fire. She wanted to scream, wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. Her hands did. Slowly, she rose from her hiding place and crept toward him, each footstep sinking into the blood-stained soil. The closer she came, the smaller he looked. John Maddox had always been a mountain, quiet, immovable, safe. Now he looked carved from broken clay. His arms hung in front of him, wrists wrapped in barbed wire, cuts deep and wet. Blood trickled down the post and into the earth. "Papa," her voice cracked like dry bark. She reached up with both hands, fingers trembling as she unwound the wire. It bit her too. She didn't flinch. When his hands dropped, she caught one before it hit the ground. It was warm but limp. She knelt beside him, cradling his face. His lip was split clean through. His left eye swelled shut. Dirt clung to the torn side of his shirt. She wiped his brow with the hem of her dress. Her eyes burned. She blinked fast, refusing to let the tears fall. "Papa, can you hear me?" A sound came from his chest, a rough rasp, like stones grinding. She leaned closer. His lips barely moved, but she heard it, clear enough to stop her heart. "Don't let them take the valley." It was all he could say. Then his head dropped against her shoulder. She didn't carry him far, just to the shadow of the pine, where the air was cooler and the ground soft with pine needles. She dragged him by the arms, gritting her teeth with every inch. Her knees tore on the gravel. Blood smeared his pant leg and stained her hands. But she didn't stop until he was lying flat beneath the tree her mother had planted the year Emmy was born. She left him only once. Inside the house, she moved like a ghost through memories. Her mother's shawl still hung on the hook. The tea kettle sat cold on the stove. She found a medicine tin in the drawer near the hearth, rusted, dented, but still full. Inside were leaves and dried roots wrapped in paper. Her mother's scrawled notes were barely legible now. She traced one with her thumb. White willow for pain, burdock for swelling, comfort for wounds. She returned to him with a bowl of creek water, a clean rag, and her small hand shaking. The herbs took time. She chewed some into a poultice the way Mama had done once when Emmy fell from the tree swing and split her knee. She pressed it to his temple and held it there, whispering things she didn't remember learning. Maybe prayers. Maybe just the sound of her voice, steady and low. The sun dipped lower behind the hills. Shadows grew long. A chill crept in that had nothing to do with weather. Emmy lit a fire. It was small, just enough to warm his hands and ward off the dusk. She sat beside him, legs crossed, arms wrapped around her ribs. She watched the flames dance and flicker, smoke curling upward into a sky already softening to violet. She hadn't cried yet. Something inside wouldn't let her. Instead, she remembered. She remembered Mama's voice in the garden, telling her how to pull weeds by the root, so they wouldn't grow back. "You can't be afraid of dirt," her mother had said, voice warm like sun on skin. "Everything worth keeping grows in it." She remembered being 8, watching her father clean the rifle. She'd asked to hold it. He'd let her. She hadn't liked the weight then. It felt too alive. But mostly she remembered that last spring, when Mama knew the fever was winning. She'd taken Emmy's hand and placed it on her chest, just above her heart. "You be still when you're scared," she'd whispered. "That's how you learn what's inside." The fire popped. Emmy looked down at her hands. Blood still crusted beneath her nails. Her dress was torn at the hem, and her boots were soaked from the creek. She stood slowly, joints stiff from cold and fear, and walked back toward the house. This time she didn't hesitate. She pried up the floorboard beneath the stove, hands sure, motions quick. There, wrapped in burlap and oiled cloth, lay the rifle. Her father's. The wood was dark, polished smooth from years of calloused hands. The metal still gleamed faintly in the low light. She lifted it. It was heavy, heavier than she remembered, but her arms didn't shake. She sat on the porch, the rifle across her knees, and watched the wind roll over the tall grass like an invisible tide. Somewhere out there, the men who did this were laughing, counting what they'd stolen, thinking no one would come after them. They were wrong. She didn't know how far they'd gone, didn't know how many bullets were in the rifle, but she knew the land. She knew every ridge, every game trail, every place a man could hide or ambush or rest. She knew where they'd likely camp, under the black rock near Devil's Hollow, where the spring bubbled and the trees grew tight and tall. Her father once said no man should sleep there without a fire at his back. She would go, not to fight, not at first, to find them, to see their faces, to know their scent, their voices, the rhythm of their breathing. The wind stirred her braid. Her eyes, still swollen from holding back tears, narrowed as she scanned the horizon. She would not run. She stood and stepped off the porch. The stars were just beginning to show, pale and flickering, like candles left too long in the cold. The air had that stillness that comes before something breaks, a silence so complete it hummed in her bones. She walked back to the pine tree. Her father slept, breath rasping but steady. She knelt beside him, wrapped the rifle in an old wool blanket, and kissed the back of his hand. "I won't let them," she whispered. Then she turned toward the trees and vanished into the dark. The forest swallowed her. The world narrowed to hoof prints and silence, to the distant hush of wind brushing pine needles and the occasional creak of a tree long dead but refusing to fall. Emmy moved carefully, the rifle cradled in both arms like a sleeping infant, her boots muffled in the loam. Each step was chosen, each breath measured. The trail led north, away from the ridges she knew, into the deeper part of the valley, where the trees grew tighter and taller, and the sky seemed farther away. They were careless, those men, bandits with stolen horses and laughter that had no place in this quiet. They left crushed branches, trampled underbrush, a torn scrap of canvas that fluttered on a thorn like a warning flag. She followed them not like a hunter, but like a shadow. Still, she didn't know what she'd do when she found them. The rifle was too long, too heavy, its balance unfamiliar. Her hands ached from gripping it. Her legs burned from the uphill climb. But she pressed on. The faces of the men haunted her, blurred by dust and blood, yes, but seared into the backs of her eyes with sickening clarity. She didn't know their names, but she knew their cruelty. A branch snapped beneath her boot. She froze. Not far ahead, the terrain narrowed into a gully, lined with slick stone and overgrown brush. At its mouth, a wide scatter of bones, bleached white and broken. Deer, she thought at first, but then she spotted a scrap of cloth near one, and the claw marks, long, deep, gouged into the bark of a nearby tree. The stench hit her a heartbeat later. She took one step back. Then a low growl crawled through the silence, like thunder through mist. Emmy turned her head slowly, breath locking in her throat. The cougar stood not 20 feet away, sleek and golden, muscles rippling under its fur like smoke-made flesh. Its eyes fixed on her with quiet, primal calculation. It didn't crouch, didn't charge, just stared, as if trying to decide if she was worth the effort. Her hands gripped the rifle. She knew she couldn't raise it fast enough. Her legs were ready to run, but her heart told her it wouldn't matter. Then a sound, so soft it was almost not there. A whisper of movement behind her. A shifting of light. The cougar flinched. Its ears twitched. Its tail gave a low flick. And then it turned and vanished into the brush, not fleeing, not afraid. Simply gone, like mist lifting at sunrise. Emmy stood still, heart pounding so hard it made her fingertips tremble. She turned slowly, the rifle coming up. A man stood behind her, tall, still, wrapped in leather and shadow. His face was painted, one half dark as coal, the other bare, the line between them sharp and unwavering. Feathers hung from one shoulder, and his boots made no sound. His eyes, dark, unblinking, held hers with quiet, unreadable intensity. She pointed the rifle at his chest. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just looked at her as if weighing something deeper than threat or fear. "Stay back," she said, but her voice didn't carry far. He didn't answer. A crow called somewhere above. Wind rustled the pine tips. She held her breath. The man lifted one eyebrow, slow, deliberate, not mocking, almost amused. She lowered the rifle. His eyes flicked to the ground, then back to hers. He stepped past her without sound and knelt in the dirt. With a fingertip, he traced the bandit's trail. 3 horses, all heavy laden, one with a slight limp in the left hind leg. Emmy could see it now, clearer than before. He looked up at her. Then motion come. She didn't move right away. Something inside her, the part that still remembered her mother's warnings about strangers, the part that had been alone too long, hesitated. But something deeper, something older, trusted him. Not because of anything he said. He hadn't said a word, but because he didn't need to. She nodded, and followed. They moved through the pines like smoke, quiet and unhurried. The man, Wyatt, though she didn't know his name yet, chose paths she never would have seen. He avoided loose rock and brittle branches, led her across streams where no sound followed, through thickets that seemed to part for him and close behind them again. She watched how he moved, low, steady, patient, like the forest belonged to him. Once, he paused and held out his hand. A small rabbit perched on the edge of a rock, just ahead. Emmy had stepped toward it without thinking, but Wyatt's hand had stopped her. They waited. A hawk cried above. The rabbit fled. Then they moved on. The sun drifted lower through the trees. Evening light turned everything gold, then bronze, then gray. The woods began to speak, soft hoots from owls, rustles in the underbrush, the occasional drip of water from unseen springs. Still, neither of them spoke. Emmy felt the weight of silence in her chest. Not uncomfortable, just strange, like something sacred had wrapped itself around them. When they paused to rest, he pulled a small pouch from his belt and offered her a strip of dried meat. She hesitated, then took it. It was tough, salty, and strange, but it filled the ache in her belly. She tried to say thank you, but he'd already turned, studying the trees ahead. They reached a ridge near dusk. Below them, in a clearing ringed by black pines, smoke drifted up from a campfire. Emmy's breath caught. There, 3 figures moving around the fire, one feeding the flames, one hunched over a saddlebag, and one polishing something metallic. Her father's rifle. Her hands clenched. Wyatt placed a hand on her shoulder, not to stop her, but to steady her. She looked at him, and for the first time, he spoke. "Wait for dark." His voice was low, calm, like Riverstone. Then he melted back into the trees. Emmy stayed there, crouched beside a moss-covered stump, eyes fixed on the camp below. Her pulse thundered in her throat. She could feel the anger boiling in her, hot and wild. But the fire inside her was quiet now, controlled. She would wait. She wasn't alone anymore. Rain came like judgment. The sky cracked open with no warning. 1 minute the forest whispered under a gentle dust breeze, and the next, wind howled through the trees, and the world turned silver with water. Emmy stumbled as thunder rolled over the hills, chasing lightning through the dark canopy. Mud pulled at her boots, roots snatched at her legs. The rifle slipped from her grip once and nearly vanished into the underbrush. Wyatt said nothing. He only moved, fast and sure, cutting a path through the storm like the forest itself bowed to him. Emmy tried to follow, but the trail vanished beneath rushing water. The ground turned to slick stone, and the wind stole her breath. She fell, once, twice, then the slope dropped. Her scream was brief, a sharp cry as her feet slid out from under her and the world tilted. She hit the side of the ravine hard, tumbling through wet leaves and jagged rock. Her shoulder slammed against a tree root. Pain shot through her ribs. For a moment, everything was a blur of noise and falling water. Then the world went still. She lay at the bottom, curled on her side in cold mud, breath shivering in her lungs. The sky overhead was a fractured mirror of storm and shadow. Above, a voice, not loud but firm. "Hold on." She turned her head. Wyatt stood at the edge of the ravine, already tying something with swift hands, long strips of bark, twisted together, braided tight. He tossed one end down. It hit the mud near her hand. "Climb." Her fingers shook as she gripped it. The bark cut into her palms, but she pulled. Each step was agony, her muscles screaming, soaked boots slipping against rock. But he didn't let go. Not once. And when she neared the top, his arms locked around hers and hauled her up like she weighed nothing. She collapsed beside him, coughing, soaked through, blood on her elbow. Wyatt didn't ask if she was hurt. He only helped her to her feet, steadying her with a hand beneath her arm. Then they moved again, slower now, through rain and fading light, until they found shelter beneath an overhanging ledge framed by stone and moss. They built a fire from nothing. Wyatt crushed dry pine from under his cloak, kindling it with flint and patience until orange light flickered against wet stone. Emmy sat near it, legs folded, arms around herself. Her teeth chattered, but it wasn't the cold. She stared at the flames like they might offer an answer she hadn't found yet. Wyatt sat across from her, sharpening a small knife with a stone. The rhythm was slow. "Come. I thought he was dead," she said softly, "when I saw him tied up like that." Wyatt didn't look up. "They broke him," she said. Her voice cracked, like he was nothing, like he was just some old mule. Silence. Then, from across the fire, Wyatt's voice, deep, low, spoken as if it came from stone. "A broken horse still runs." She looked at him, startled. He met her eyes. For the first time, she saw something beneath his stillness, something old and wounded, like a scar hidden under war paint. From his pack, he pulled something wrapped in buckskin. He unrolled it slowly and set it in the dirt between them. A broken arrow shaft, splintered, burnt on one end. "My boy carved it," he said. "Years ago." The fire snapped. Rain whispered beyond the ledge. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. Their silence said more than words. When the storm passed, the world felt scraped clean. The sky turned a pale slate, and mist drifted low through the trees. They moved again, quieter now, more careful. Emmy limped, but she said nothing. Every time her leg throbbed, she remembered her father's face in the dust, and she walked harder. Near noon, Wyatt held up a hand. They dropped low behind a rise of rock and crawled forward. Below them, nestled between pine and shale, sat the outlaw camp. 3 horses tied near a fallen log. Supplies scattered in crates and sacks. A pot on the fire. One man sleeping, another pacing near the trees, and the third, her father's hat on his head. She sucked in a breath. Rage burned in her throat, bright and sudden. Wyatt placed a hand on her shoulder. She gripped the rifle, hands trembling. He pulled a charcoal stub from his pouch and drew in the dirt between them, a path through the rocks, a flank that would lead them to higher ground above the camp. Arrows marked angles, quiet signs. He looked at her. Her fingers tightened around the rifle. It shook, but her eyes didn't. She nodded. The hunt had begun. Night crawled slow and heavy over the valley, wrapping every rock and pine in shadows. The outlaws' fire burned like a wound in the dark, casting long flickers of orange across their rough laughter and careless movements. The three men were drunk, loud, clumsy with stolen whiskey and stolen pride. One of them, the big one with the scorched hat that didn't quite fit his head, slammed a stolen saddle against a barrel like a drum, cackling. The others howled in rhythm, boots stomping in dust that once held blood. Emmy watched from the ridge above, her chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths. The rifle lay across the stone in front of her, its cold metal pressed against her cheek. The world narrowed to a single thread, the glow of the fire, the shape of the leader near it, and the rhythm of her heartbeat in her ears. Wyatt disappeared into the trees, with the quiet of a falling leaf. Then came the howl, a low, drawn-out cry that rose from the distance. Not a man's voice, but a coyote's call. It sliced through the men's noise, making two of them freeze mid-laugh. The one with the saddle laughed again. "Coyotes," he muttered. "Dumb bastards." Still, two of them stood, uneasy, and headed toward the sound, rifles slung lazy over their shoulders. Emmy's fingers tightened on the stock. She moved low, circling the ridge to flank the camp. Her boots were silent in the pine needles, her breath held like glass in her throat. Every muscle screamed for retreat, but she pressed on, inching forward until a narrow crack in the boulders gave her the perfect view of the firelight below. The leader was alone by the flames now, crouched beside a crate, sharpening a blade. The steel scraped in rhythm, back and forth, a sound crueler than any word. The fire threw light across his jaw, showing the ugly smile he wore even in silence. Her finger found the trigger. The rifle wavered. She held her breath, then squeezed. The crack of the shot shattered the forest. The man dropped with a cry, the knife clattering into the dirt. Blood welled from his shoulder, and he rolled, screaming, clutching the wound. Shouts erupted. The two bandits returned fire, blindly spraying bullets toward the ridge. Bark exploded. A shot ripped past her ear. She ducked, heart thundering, scrambling to reload. Wyatt struck like a shadow. One outlaw barely turned before a knife buried in his neck. He dropped without a sound. The last man turned wild-eyed, backing toward the horses, firing into the dark. Emmy rose, the rifle steadier this time. Her breath came in short, clipped gasps. She found his chest in the sights. Fired. The bullet hit center mass. He spun and fell, howling, blood pouring from his gut. Silence crashed down like a curtain. The leader, still alive, crawled toward his dropped blade, groaning. Emmy stepped from the rocks, boots sinking in ash. Her hands shook, but she walked toward him anyway, the rifle still warm in her grip. He looked up, eyes wild. "Please." Behind her, a branch cracked. Then strong arms wrapped around her, rough, violent, dragging her backward. She screamed, kicking, but the rifle tumbled from her hands, and she hit the ground hard. The last outlaw hadn't died. He'd only hidden. He pinned her, pressing her face into the dirt, breath sour in her ear. Her chest heaved with panic. She struggled, clawing, biting, anything, but his weight crushed her, and her hands couldn't reach the rifle. Then the world shifted again, a blur of motion, and the man was ripped from her. Wyatt tackled him like a falling boulder, and the two rolled in a mess of fists and fury. Emmy crawled, dragging herself through blood and dirt. Her fingers closed on the rifle. She rolled. The man was on top of Wyatt now, choking him with both hands. She didn't hesitate. The shot rang through the trees like thunder. His body slumped. Wyatt shoved him off. Emmy sat still for a long time, staring at the smoking end of the rifle. Her shoulders heaved. Her fingers wouldn't let go. even as the blood on the stock cooled against her palm. The fire crackled. Smoke curled upward into the dark. Wyatt stood slowly and looked down at her. His chest rose and fell, blood trailing down one arm. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He only nodded once. Emmy looked up at him. She didn't nod back. She just sat in the dirt, staring at the rifle, and waited for her hands to stop shaking. They came down from the ridge, with the first blush of dawn breaking through the trees. Packs heavy with stolen supplies and silence riding between them. Wyatt walked ahead, steady and sure, carrying a makeshift sling with what they'd salvaged. Emmy followed close, the rifle slung across her back like a memory made solid. Her legs ached. Her boots were damp from creek water. But she didn't stumble. The ranch appeared through the fog like something dreamed, half-burnt fences, the barn with one wall caved in, and the house, still standing though scarred. She pushed open the door with her shoulder, and the scent of ash and sickness hit her all at once. John lay where she'd left him, barely breathing, skin pale and pulled tight against his bones. But his chest rose, shallow and slow. She knelt beside him, brushed back his hair with fingers still trembling from the fight. His eyes fluttered open, cloudy, confused. Then they focused. "Emmy," she nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "I'm here." He tried to sit up. Failed. She eased his hand up instead, and placed it gently over the rifle, now warm from the walk home. His fingers curled around the stock like he'd done it 1,000 times, and something flickered in his eyes. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" She looked down, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't. I just knew I had to." He smiled then, not wide, not full, but enough to make her chest ache. His hand squeezed hers once, then fell back. Sleep took him again, but it was a healing kind of sleep this time, not the kind that dragged people down. Outside, the wind had shifted. The pines whispered something quieter, something kinder. Emmy stepped out into the pale light and found Wyatt near the fire pit, restoking the coals. He moved like he always had, deliberate, precise, untouched by the noise of the world. She walked over, lowered herself beside him without speaking. After a while, she pulled a blanket from her pack and held it out. He looked at it, then at her. He didn't take it, but he nodded once, that slow, respectful way he had, and turned his gaze back to the flames. The sky above them turned to bruised velvet. Stars blinked away, and the tree stood tall as ever. No words passed between them. None were needed. By morning, he was gone. No trail, no sign, just a memory of him moving through trees, like a ghost in the pines. She searched for a while, half hoping to see a flicker of movement, a dark shape against the light. There was nothing but the hush of morning and the hush inside her chest. She climbed the ridge alone, the same ridge where her father had once stood, hands on his hips, looking out over the land like it was a promise and a burden all at once. Emmy stood there now, taller than she'd ever felt before. The rifle rested across her back like it belonged there. Her shadow stretched long behind her. The sun lifted slow, golden and quiet, spilling over the hills and crawling down into the valley. Everything below shimmered, the fields, the barn, the ashes. Broken pieces, maybe, but still theirs. She didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She just breathed it in. The West never cared how old you were, just whether you could stand. By the time the sun rose again, Emmy Maddox stood tall, and the valley was theirs.